The snow fell in heavy, unrelenting sheets, blanketing the Wyoming plains like a shroud drawn over the world. Eliza clutched the bundle against her chest, her fingers numb and cracking in the bitter wind that howled through the barren valley. The baby, her youngest, barely 6 months, whimpered faintly, his tiny breaths fogging the woolen wrap she had torn from her own skirt. Behind her, the other three children huddled together, their small forms shivering under a single, threadbare blanket. Mary, the eldest at 7, held the twins 4-year-old Samuel and Sarah, their faces pale as the drifts piling around them. The wagon tracks that had brought them here were already vanishing, swallowed by the storm, as if the world itself conspired to erase their abandonment. She had walked for hours or perhaps days it blurred in the cold that seeped into her bones like poison. Her husband Thomas had promised a new start, a homestead beyond the mountains where the land was fertile and the winters mild. But the fever had taken him 2 weeks back, leaving her with debts and whispers in the last town they'd passed. The driver of the stagecoach had refused to go further, dumping them at the edge of this godforsaken stretch when the snow thickened. "Ain't my problem," he'd muttered, cracking the reins and disappearing into the white haze. Now, the children's cries cut through the silence, sharp as knives. But the plains offered no echo, no mercy. The sky pressed down gray and indifferent, the distant Rockies looming like silent judges. Eliza's knees buckled and she sank into the snow, the wet cold soaking through her dress. Her vision swam, hunger gnawing at her insides like a wild animal. She thought of the last meal, stale bread shared in the rattling coach, the children's eyes wide with unspoken fear. Mary's hand tugged at her sleeve, small and insistent. "Mama, it's cold," the girl whispered, her voice trembling. Eliza pulled her close, but her arms felt heavy, useless. The twins buried their faces in her lap, their sobs muffled against the fabric. The baby stirred again, his cry weaker now, and panic rose in her throat, thick and choking. She had nothing left, no food, no shelter, only the weight of four lives pressing against her failing body. Memories flickered like shadows in the storm. Back in Missouri, before the westward pull, life had been a rhythm of chores and quiet hopes. Thomas had been kind then, his hands calloused from the plow, his laughter filling the small cabin on summer evenings. They married young, she 18 and he 22, drawn by the promise of land grants and stories of fortune in the territories. The first child came quickly, Mary with her father's dark curls, and joy had bloomed amid the hardships. But the droughts came scorching the fields, and Thomas's dreams turned restless. He spoke of gold in Colorado ranches in Wyoming, his voice feverish as he packed their belongings. "We'll make it, Liza," he'd said, kissing her forehead. Yet the trail had broken him. Dysentery in Kansas bandits near the Platte River, stealing their best horse. By the time the fever claimed him in a makeshift grave beside the road, his eyes had lost their fire, leaving her to face the emptiness alone. She remembered the night he died, the way his hand had gone limp in hers, the children's bewildered faces as she dug the earth with a broken shovel. The guilt twisted in her now sharper than the wind. Had she pushed him too hard, or not enough? The twins had been born on the move, in a tent during a rainstorm, their cries blending with thunder. Samuel's first steps on dusty trails, Sarah's laughter, chasing prairie dogs. Now those moments felt like taunts, reminders of what the frontier devoured without remorse. Eliza pressed her forehead to Mary's hair, inhaling the faint scent of soap from their last wash in a creek. The snow clung to her lashes, blurring the horizon. Hoofbeats, no, just the pulse in her ears, the delusion of rescue in a land that cared nothing for widows and orphans. As dusk deepened, the cold tightened its grip, turning her thoughts sluggish. She whispered prayers into the void, fragments of psalms her mother had taught her long ago. The children grew still, their breaths shallow, and terror clawed at her chest. She would not let them fade here, not like this. With a grunt, she forced herself up, staggering forward, one foot dragging through the drift. The plains stretched endless, a white sea swallowing all color, all hope. Yet somewhere in the distance, a shape emerged, a dark smudge against the gray. Perhaps a rock, perhaps nothing. Her boot caught on ice and she fell again, the impact jarring her teeth. The baby wailed, a thin sound lost in the gale. Then, through the haze, a figure materialized. Not a mirage, but a man on horseback, his coat dusted with snow, his hat pulled low. He reined in, the horse steam rising from its flanks, and dismounted slowly, his boots crunching the crust. His face was weathered lines etched deep as Canyon's eyes narrowed against the wind. He said nothing at first, just stood there, a solid presence in the chaos. Eliza lifted her head, her voice a rasp. "Please." The old rancher knelt, his gloved hands gentle as he lifted the blanket from the children. His breath clouded the air, and for a moment the world held still. The old rancher's name was Caleb Harlan, though he did not offer it right away. He simply knelt in the snow, broad shoulders, blocking some of the wind, and studied the children with the slow, careful attention of a man who had once lost everything worth counting. His coat was heavy wool, patched at the elbows, smelling faintly of wood smoke and horse. When he reached for the baby, Eliza's arms tightened instinctively, a last flare of defiance in a body that had nothing else left. "Easy now," he said, voice low and rough as gravel underfoot. "I ain't here to take what ain't mine." He lifted the infant with surprising gentleness, tucking the child inside his coat against his chest. The baby's cries softened almost at once, muffled by warmth and the steady thump of a stranger's heart. Caleb glanced at Eliza's eyes, the color of winter river water gray, unreadable yet not unkind. Without another word, he scooped up Sarah, the smaller twin, and set her astride his saddle, then helped Samuel climb up behind her. Mary hesitated, looking to her mother, but Eliza could only nod, teeth chattering too hard to speak. Caleb lifted Eliza last. She was lighter than she should have been, bones sharp under skin, and when he settled her in front of him, on the big bay gelding, she sagged against his chest like a broken marionette. The children pressed close, small hands clutching coat and mane. The horse snorted once, steam curling from wide nostrils, then moved forward at a careful walk-breaking trail through the deepening drifts. The ranch house appeared after what felt like hours, but was probably less than one, a low, sturdy log structure half buried in snow smoke rising straight and thin from the stone chimney. A lean-to barn stood beside it, and a single windmill creaked in the wind, its blades turning slow circles. No other buildings, no neighbors, just the house and the endless white plains stretching away on every side. Inside, the warmth struck like a physical blow. A fire roared in the hearth logs, snapping light flickering over rough-hewn walls, and a plank table scarred from years of use. Caleb set the baby on a quilt near the heat, then carried the others to the fire one by one. He moved with the economy of a man who had done hard things many times and no longer wasted motion. He ladled broth from a kettle, venison and barley thick enough to stand a spoon in, and pressed tin cups into small shaking hands. Eliza sat on the edge of a ladder-back chair, too exhausted to cry. She watched him work, the way he broke pieces of hard cornbread. For the twins, the careful tilt of the cup when he helped the baby drink goat's milk warmed on the stove. He did not speak unless necessary, and when he did, his words were plain, stripped of anything ornamental. "You're safe here tonight," he said once, meeting her eyes for the first time since the trail. "Rest. Tomorrow we'll see what's what." She managed only a nod. The children ate slowly at first, then with sudden, desperate hunger, crumbs falling to the floorboards. Mary kept one hand on her mother's knee as though afraid the warmth might vanish if she let go. When the food was gone and the cups empty, Caleb spread blankets on the floor near the hearth, made a pallet for Eliza on the narrow cot in the corner. He took his own bedroll to the far side of the room near the door, rifle propped within reach. Sleep came to the children quickly, heavy and trusting. Eliza fought it longer, staring at the ceiling beams, listening to the wind claw at the shutters. She thought of Thomas's grave unmarked except for a flat stone she had set herself. She thought of the driver's cold face, the way he had not looked back. And she thought of this stranger who had stopped when no one else would, who had carried 4 half-frozen children without asking their names or hers. Across the room, Caleb sat with his back to the wall, cleaning his rifle by lamplight. His hands moved with practiced care, cloth sliding along the barrel, oil gleaming. Once he glanced up and caught her watching. Neither spoke. He simply returned to his task, the soft metallic clicks, the only sound besides the fire's low murmur and the children's breathing. In the morning, the storm had eased to a fine, steady fall. Caleb was already outside when Eliza woke, breaking ice on the stock tank, feeding the horses and the milk goat. She watched him from the window, breath fogging the glass. He wore no hat now. His hair was iron gray, thinning at the crown, and a faint scar curved along his left cheekbone like a crescent moon. He moved without hurry, deliberate, as though time had long ago stopped pressing him. When he came back inside, snow dusting his shoulders, he set a pail of fresh milk on the table and a small bundle of dried apples he must have saved from last fall. The children stirred, drawn by the smell of coffee and the promise of more food. Mary helped her mother sit up. Eliza's legs still trembled, but the sharp edge of hunger had dulled. Caleb poured coffee into a chipped mug and set it before her. "Drink slow," he said. "Body's gotta remember how." She wrapped her hands around the warmth, the first real heat she had felt in days that did not come from panic or fever. "Why?" she asked, voice hoarse. It was the only word she could manage. He looked at her a long moment, then out the window where the snow continued to fall. "I've been left in worse," he said quietly. "Once, long time ago, somebody stopped for me, figured it was my turn." He did not elaborate. He simply turned back to the stove, cracked eggs into a skillet, the sizzle filling the small room with ordinary, miraculous sound. If this land tested your patience instead of rewarding speed, subscribe and stay the course. Days passed in a quiet rhythm that felt almost like mercy after the storm's violence. The snow continued to fall soft, now piling drifts against the cabin walls until the windows sat half blind. Inside, the world shrank to firelight, the smell of wood smoke and the small sounds of children learning to trust again. Eliza moved slowly at first, every joint protesting, but necessity pulled her upright. She washed the children's faces with warm water from the kettle, combed the tangles from Mary's hair with fingers that still shook, rocked the baby when his cries woke the house before dawn. Caleb watched without comment, only once murmuring, "You don't have to do it all at once," when she tried to stand too long at the stove. He taught her the small mechanics of survival here, how to bank the fire so it lasted through the night, how to break the crust on the snow outside the door without sinking to her hips, how to measure out the last of the flour and stretch it with ground cornmeal until spring promised more. He spoke little of himself, but the cabin told its own story: a single iron bed in the loft, unused for years, a child's wooden horse gathering dust on a shelf, a woman's shawl folded neatly in a cedar chest, its fringe unraveled at the ends. One afternoon, while the twins napped and Mary sat cross-legged by the hearth stringing dried beans into necklaces, Caleb took Eliza to the barn. The air inside was warmer, thick with the scent of hay and animal breath. He showed her how to milk the goat, gentle pressure, steady rhythm, his large hands guiding hers for a moment until she found the motion herself. When the first thin stream hit the pail, she laughed, a short, startled sound that surprised them both. "You've got steady hands," he said, wiping his palms on his trousers. "Better'n most come out here thinking they know everything." She looked at him, then really looked. The scar on his cheek caught the lantern light, pale against weathered skin. "How long have you been alone?" she asked. He considered the question as though weighing its cost. 12 years since my wife passed. 8 since my boy left for California. Said he'd send for me when he struck it rich. A dry smile touched his mouth and vanished. Never did. Last letter came 6 years back. Haven't heard since. Eliza nodded the ache in her own chest, recognizing its twin. She thought of Thomas's promises, the way they had glittered like fool's gold, until the reality of dust and debt ground them down. I keep waiting to stop hurting, she said quietly. Thought the cold would take it, or the hunger. It just stays. Caleb leaned against a stall post, arms crossed. It don't leave. You just learn to carry it different, like a stone in your pocket. After a while, you forget it's there until something rattles it. They stood in the dim barn light, the goat chewing steadily snow, sifting through cracks in the boards. For the first time, since the stagecoach driver had cracked his whip and left them, Eliza felt the possibility of breath that was not borrowed. Evenings grew easier. Caleb carved small wooden animals for the twins, a bear, a deer, a clumsy horse, and set them on the table like offerings. Samuel carried the bear everywhere, whispering secrets to its carved ears. Sarah lined them up in rows, naming them after stars she half remembered from her father's stories. Mary helped Eliza knead dough her small hands, leaving perfect prints in the flour. The baby, gaining strength, kicked his legs when Caleb held him near the fire, tiny fingers curling around the rancher's calloused thumb. One night after the children slept, Eliza sat at the table mending a tear in Caleb's coat while he oiled harness leather. The lamp threw long shadows across the room. She worked in silence until the needle slipped and pricked her finger. A bead of blood welled. She pressed it to her apron without a sound. You don't have to fix my things, Caleb said, not looking up. I want to, she answered. It's what I know how to do. He set the harness aside. You're not obliged here, Eliza. Soon as the pass clears, you can go wherever you aim. Town's got a boarding house. Folks might take in a widow and her young ones. The words landed like stones in still water. She stared at the needle in her hand, the thread taut. And if I don't want to go, he met her eyes, then steady and searching. Then you stay till you're sure. No debt. No promise I'll ask you to make. She nodded once, throat tight. Outside, the wind had dropped to a whisper. The cabin creaked softly, settling into itself like an old dog by the hearth. For the first time in months, the silence did not feel like abandonment. The thaw came slowly reluctant, as though the land itself distrusted spring. Icicles lengthened on the eaves, then snapped free with sharp cracks that echoed across the yard. Mud appeared in patches dark and sucking, clinging to boots and hems. The children ran barefoot when they could, laughing at the cold squelch between their toes, while Eliza watched from the doorway, arms crossed against the damp chill that still lingered in her bones. Caleb worked longer hours now, repairing fence lines buried under drifted snow, checking on the few head of cattle that had wintered in the sheltered draw behind the house. He came in at dusk smelling of wet earth and pine resin shoulders, heavy, but eyes clearer than they had been weeks before. Eliza noticed the small changes in him, the way he left his hat on the peg by the door instead of wearing it indoors, the faint whistle he carried when he fed the horses, low and tuneless but steady. One morning she found him in the barn, splitting kindling, the axe rising and falling in clean, practiced arcs. She carried out a tin cup of coffee, black and strong, the way he liked it. He paused when she approached, wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his wrist, and accepted the cup without a word. They stood together in the open doorway, watching mist rise off the melting snow like slow smoke. You ever think about leaving this place? She asked. He took a sip, considered the question over the rim. Thought about it plenty. After my boy went west after Ellen died. Figured I'd sell out, follow the railroad somewhere warmer. But every time I got close to town with the deed in my pocket, something pulled me back. This ground's got roots in me I didn't plant. Eliza looked out at the valley, the way the first green shoots pushed through the brown grass like stubborn promises. I used to think roots were something you could carry with you, she said. Thomas believed that, kept saying the next valley would be better, the next claim richer. Turns out roots don't travel well. Caleb set the cup on a barrelhead. Some do, if you plant them deep enough first. She felt the weight of his words settle between them, not heavy, but real. She turned to him then, searching his face. The scar on his cheek had faded to a thin silver line in the stronger light. His eyes held hers without flinching, steady as stone. That evening after supper, the twins asleep on their pallet, and Mary reading aloud from the worn Bible, Caleb kept on the shelf. Eliza stepped outside. The sky had cleared to a deep, endless blue-black stars sharp as pinpricks. Caleb followed a few minutes later, coatless sleeves rolled to his elbows despite the lingering cold. He stopped beside her, hands in his pockets, breath clouding the air. Pass is open tomorrow, he said quietly. Town's a day's ride if the mud ain't too bad. You could send word, see about kin back east. Or find work. Boarding house still takes women who can cook and clean. Eliza wrapped her shawl tighter. I wrote my sister last fall. She never answered. Reckon she thinks we're dead already, or wishes we were. She paused, listening to the soft drip of meltwater from the roof. I don't want to go back to being pitied. Or worse, being someone's charity. He nodded, once slow. Ain't offering charity. She looked at him, then really looked. What are you offering? He exhaled, the sound rough in his throat. A place. Not perfect. Roof leaks when the wind's wrong. Winter'll come again, harder maybe. But it's steady. And the young ones, they're already putting down shoots here. Samuel asked me this morning if the bear carving could sleep in the barn with the real horses. Sarah wants to name the new kid goat after her ma. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she had come to recognize as discomfort. And you belong where you're needed. Looks like that's here, if you'll have it. Her heart beat hard against her ribs, loud enough she thought he might hear it. She reached out, tentative, and laid her hand on his forearm. The muscle there was warm, solid beneath the rough cotton. He did not pull away. I'm scared, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Not of the work. Not of the winters. Of believing again. Of hoping. Caleb covered her hand with his own calluses, rough against her skin. I'm scared too, he said. Been a long time since I let anybody close enough to hurt me. Longer since I wanted somebody to stay. They stood like that, a long minute, the night quiet except for the drip and the distant call of an owl. Then Eliza stepped closer, rested her forehead against his shoulder. He smelled of wood smoke and leather and something deeper, like earth after rain. His arms came around her slowly, careful, as though he feared she might break or disappear. When she lifted her head, he kissed her. Not hungry, not desperate, just honest. A quiet claiming, like setting a fence post deep where it would hold against wind and time. Inside, Mary's voice faltered over a verse, then picked up again softer. The lamp flickered through the window, throwing gold across the snow. Somewhere in the barn, a horse nickered low. The world kept turning indifferent as ever, but for once it did not feel like an enemy. The first real sign of trouble arrived with the mud. A rider came up the trail 3 days after the pass, cleared a lean man in a black duster whose horse carried the brand of the double-bar outfit 20 miles east. He did not dismount, only tipped his hat when Caleb stepped onto the porch, rifle loose in the crook of his arm. Harlan, the man called. Town's asking after a woman named of Eliza Grayson. Says she got left in the snow with 4 young ones. Stage driver swore she never made it past the ridge. Sheriff's offering a small reward for word of her dead or alive, though he'd rather alive. Caleb's face did not change. That's so. The rider spat into the melting snow. Her husband's kin back in Missouri put up the money. Claim the land he filed on reverts if no heirs show. They want the deed signed over clean. Also want the kids if she's gone. Say their blood. Eliza, listening from inside the half-open door, felt the air leave her lungs. She had not thought of the claim in weeks. The scrap of paper Thomas had carried folded in his vest, the one she had buried with him, because it seemed useless without him to work it. Now it had teeth. The rider waited. Caleb studied him the way he studied a lame calf, calm, thorough. Tell the sheriff she's alive. Staying here till she decides different. Kids, too. No need for reward. The man's eyes flicked toward the cabin. Folks say you ain't one for company, Harlan. Especially not a widow and a passel of young ones. You sure she ain't persuaded you some? Caleb's voice stayed even. I'm sure I don't answer to town gossip. You delivered your message. Ride safe. The man lingered a moment longer, then reined his horse around and disappeared down the trail, mud splashing behind him. Inside, Eliza stood with her back to the wall, arms wrapped around herself. The children were outside chasing the new kid goat, their laughter, then through the open window. She looked at Caleb when he came in, snow melting off his boots onto the floorboards. They want the land, she said. Thomas filed it joint. If I don't claim it, it goes back to the government or to his cousins. They never liked me. Said I was too soft for frontier life. Caleb hung his coat, moved to the stove, and poured coffee he did not drink. Lands 20 miles south. Rough country. No cabin, no well dug. You'd have to start from nothing. Again. I know. Her voice cracked on the last word. But it's his. It's all that's left of him besides the children. If I walk away, it's like I'm saying he never mattered. Caleb set the cup down untouched. He mattered. To you, to them. That don't change because a piece of paper sits in some county office. You want to fight for it. I'll ride with you. Help you prove up, if that's what you need. But don't do it because guilt's got its hooks in you. She sank onto the bench, elbows on the table, face in her hands. I'm tired of running. Tired of losing pieces of myself every time I move. But I'm scared if I stay here. If I choose this, I'll wake up one day and realize I traded one cage for another. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat, forearms resting on the scarred wood. This ain't a cage. It's a choice. Every day it'll be a choice. Some days the wind will howl and the roof will leak and the young ones will drive you half mad. Some days you'll look out that window and see green where there was only white, and it'll feel like breathing for the first time. I can't promise easy. I can promise real. She lifted her head. His eyes held no plea, only truth, worn, weathered, but clear. She reached across the table and turned his hand, palm up, traced the deep lines there with her fingertip. You lost people too, she said. You stayed anyway. Had to, he answered. Running don't bring them back. Staying, sometimes it lets you keep what's worth keeping. Outside, Mary's voice rose in mock outrage as Samuel tried to ride the goat. The baby gurgled from his cradle near the fire. Eliza felt the cabin around her, the creak of logs settling, the faint smell of bread rising under a cloth, the warmth that had seeped back into her marrow these past weeks. It was not perfect. It was not even safe. But it was hers to choose. That night, after the lamp was blown out and the children slept, she slipped from the cot and crossed the room to where Caleb lay on his bedroll. She knelt beside him, the floorboards cold against her knees. He woke instantly, eyes open in the dark. I'm staying, she whispered. Not because I have nowhere else, because I want here. With you. With them. All of it. He reached up, brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. His touch was light, reverent. Then we'll make it work, he said. One day at a time. She leaned down and kissed him, slow, certain tasting of coffee and wood smoke, and the beginning of something neither had dared name until now. When she drew back, he pulled her down beside him, wrapped an arm around her waist, and held her against his chest until her breathing matched his own. Outside, the last of the snow melted into the earth-feeding roots that had waited years to stir. The trouble did not wait for summer. By late April, the grass had greened enough for the cattle to spread out, and Caleb rode out most days to check the herd and mend what the winter had torn. Eliza stayed closer to the house, planting a small kitchen garden behind the lean-to potatoes, carrots, beans, her hands in the cool soil feeling like absolution. The children helped when they could. Mary carried water in buckets too big for her. Samuel chased crows from the new chutes. Sarah trailed after the goat kid, like a shadow. The baby, now crawling, left small handprints in the turned earth. One noon, Caleb returned early, face set hard. He unsaddled the bay without speaking, then came inside and closed the door against the bright day. Eliza looked up from kneading dough flour, dusting her arms to the elbows. Men from town, he said. 3 of them. Thomas's cousins, one's a lawyer out of Cheyenne, got papers. They're claiming the claim's abandoned. Say, since no one's lived on it or improved it since Thomas died, it reverts. They want you to sign a quit claim. Offer $500 cash and train tickets back east for you and the children. Eliza's hands stilled in the dough. $500 was more money than she had seen in years. Enough to start over somewhere. Lewis near her sister, the silence between them could be mended. Enough to feed 4 children without leaning on anyone's charity. She felt the pull of it sharp as a hook in her ribs. They're waiting at the gate, Caleb added. Polite. But they ain't leaving without an answer. She wiped her hands on her apron. Slow, deliberate. What happens if I don't sign? They'll file anyway. Lawyer says the law's on their side. Abandonment clause. Might drag through courts a year or more. You'd have to prove residency improvements. Costs, money, won't have, and they'll push. Hard. Eliza walked to the window. 3 riders sat their horses beyond the fence, 2 in dark suits, 1 in range clothes. The lawyer held a leather portfolio across his saddle. They did not look cruel, only certain. She thought of Thomas's face the last time she saw it, gray and still, the way his fingers had loosened in hers. She thought of the grave she had left unmarked because she could not bear to stay and watch the earth settle over him. I can't let them take what's his, she said, more to herself than to Caleb. Even if it's just dirt and dreams. Caleb stepped behind her close enough she felt his warmth, but not his touch. Then we fight it. Together. I got a little saved, enough for a lawyer in town maybe. Or we ride down there ourselves, start proving up. Build something. Show the land ain't empty. She turned to face him. You do that, leave this place, not leave. Add to it. Make it bigger. For them. He nodded toward the open door where Mary's voice carried, singing a half-remembered hymn to the baby. For us. The word hung between them, us, like a door left ajar. She reached up, laid her palm against his cheek, felt the faint rasp of stubble, the steady pulse beneath. I don't want to lose you in the fighting, she said. You won't. She nodded once, decisive. Tell them no. Tell them the claim's not abandoned. Tell them we'll be there by summer's end. Caleb went out. She watched from the doorway as he walked to the gate, spoke low and level. The lawyer's face tightened. One of the cousins spat into the dust. They argued briefly, voices rising then falling. Finally, the three turned their horses and rode off dust, trailing behind like regret. When Caleb returned, he carried the weight of what was coming, but his shoulders were straight. He took her hand, led her to the porch steps. They sat side by side, watching the afternoon light stretch long across the valley. "We'll need to move fast," he said. "File intent to reside. Start a cabin. Break ground. It'll be hard. Harder than here." "I know." He looked at her, then really looked. You're sure?" She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I'm sure I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been." "Not again." That night after the children slept, they sat at the table with a kerosene lamp and an old map Caleb kept in a tin box. He traced the route south, past the ridge, where she had been left across 2 creeks into the rolling hills Thomas had chosen. She listened, asked questions, felt the old fear rise and then settle smaller, now contained. When the lamp burned low, Caleb folded the map and took her hand across the table. "We'll build it right," he said. "Not just for him, for what comes after." She turned her palm, uplaced her fingers through his. "For us." Outside, a soft wind moved through the new grass, carrying the scent of sage and promise. Somewhere far off, a coyote yipped once, then fell silent. The stars burned steady overhead, unchanged and unconcerned. But for the first time in years, Eliza did not feel small beneath them. The journey south took 6 days longer than it should have, because of the children and the loaded wagon Caleb had borrowed from a neighbor who owed him a favor. They traveled light bedrolls, a few tools, seed potatoes wrapped in burlap, the cedar chest with Ellen's shawl still folded inside. The baby rode in a sling against Eliza's chest, the twins perched on the tailgate, legs dangling, while Mary walked beside the team most mornings to stretch her legs and point out hawks circling overhead. The land Thomas had claimed lay in a shallow bowl between low hills, grass already tall and waving in the May wind. A single cottonwood stood near what would become the house site, its leaves new and bright green against the blue sky. No cabin, no fence, only a shallow depression where Thomas had started to dig a foundation before the fever took him. Eliza knelt beside it, the first evening, fingers tracing the old shovel marks in the earth, feeling the ghost of his hands there. Caleb worked without pause. He felled young pines from the nearby draw for logs, notched them with steady swings of the broadaxe, stacked them straight and true. Eliza helped where she could, mixing mud for chinking, carrying smaller branches, watching the children so they did not wander too far. Her hands blistered, then calloused again. Her back ached from bending and lifting, but each log that rose felt like reclaiming something stolen. The cousins returned twice, first with more papers, then with veiled threats delivered through a local surveyor who rode out one afternoon. The man tipped his hat, spread a map across the wagon tongue, and explained how the claim could still be contested if improvements were not substantial by the end of the season. Caleb listened, arms folded, then pointed to the rising walls. They look substantial enough to me." The surveyor left without argument. The cousins did not come again, though Eliza sometimes felt eyes on the place at dusk, perhaps imagination, perhaps not. Nights were hardest. The tent they slept in flapped in the wind, cold seeping through the canvas. The children huddled together under quilts, whispering about the new house, about the room they would share with a window facing east for the sunrise. Eliza lay awake beside Caleb, listening to his breathing, feeling the solid warmth of him next to her. One night, she turned to him in the dark. "Do you regret this?" she asked. "Leaving your own place for mine," he shifted, propped himself on an elbow. Moonlight slipped through a gap in the tent flap, silvering the scar on his cheek. "I didn't leave it. I brought it with me. The horses are here. The tools. The quiet I like. And you. He touched her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. Mostly you. She kissed his palm, tasting salt and pine sap. I never thought I'd build again. Not after Thomas. You're not building alone this time. By midsummer, the cabin stood small. One room with a loft for the children, a stone fireplace. Caleb laid himself using river rock hauled in the wagon bed. The roof was shakes. He split from fallen timber, overlapping tight against rain. Eliza whitewashed the interior walls with lime she boiled from limestone scraps, the smell sharp and clean. She planted hollyhocks along the south side because her mother had loved them, though she knew they might not survive the first hard frost. One evening, after the last chinking was done and the door hung on leather hinges, Caleb carried Eliza over the threshold, the way a groom might, though they had no preacher, no witnesses but the wind and the watching hills. The children cheered from the doorway, Mary clapping her hands, the twins jumping until dust rose around their bare feet. Inside the floor was still packed earth, but Eliza had swept it smooth and scattered wildflowers. In the corners, Indian paintbrush, lupine tiny white stars of yarrow. They ate supper at a table Caleb had built from pine planks, beans, and cornbread, fresh milk from the goat they had brought south. After the children slept in the loft, Eliza and Caleb sat on the step outside backs, against the warm logs, watching the sky turn from gold to indigo. She slipped a thin gold band from her finger, the one Thomas had given her when they were young and certain, and held it out to Caleb. I don't want to bury the past, she said, but I don't want to carry it alone anymore. He took the ring, turned it in his fingers, then pressed it back into her palm. Keep it. For Mary someday, or Sarah. Or the next one, if God's willing. He reached into his pocket and drew out another band, and simple, worn smooth, the one Ellen had worn until the day she died. This was hers. I've carried it long enough. He slid it onto Eliza's finger, then took her hand in both of his. No words, just the quiet press of skin on skin, the promise sealed in silence. The stars came out, one by one. A nighthawk called from the dark, its wings slicing the air. Somewhere in the distance, a cow lowed, soft and contented. The cabin behind them smelled of new wood and wood smoke, and the faint sweetness of wildflowers wilting in jars on the sill. Eliza leaned her head against Caleb's shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her, steady as the hills themselves. For the first time in years, the night felt not like an ending, but like the beginning of something vast and unhurried. Autumn arrived with a sudden sharpness, the cottonwoods turning gold almost overnight, leaves drifting like slow fire across the new roof. The garden had given what it could: small hard potatoes dug from the earth, carrots, no thicker than a child's finger beans that Mary strung and dried for winter. The cabin felt fuller, now lived in a shelf of books Caleb had carried south in the wagon, a cradle he built for the baby who now pulled himself up on every edge, tiny hands gripping wood still pale from the saw. One crisp morning, Eliza woke to the sound of hammering outside. She stepped onto the porch in her nightdress, shawl pulled tight, and found Caleb nailing a wooden sign above the door. The letters were rough but clear, carved deep, so wind and weather would not erase them soon. HARLAN. He stepped down from the stool, wiped his hands on his trousers, and looked up at his work as though seeing it for the first time. She crossed the yard barefoot, the grass wet and cold against her soles. Harlan, she read aloud, tracing the H with her fingertip. Not Grayson. He met her eyes. Grayson's buried with Thomas. This is what's here now. What we made. She felt something loosen inside her chest, a knot she had carried so long she forgot its shape. She stepped closer, rested her forehead against his chest. His arms came around her, steady, smelling of pine pitch and fresh cut wood. Thank you, she whispered. He kissed the top of her head. Ain't thanks, just truth. The children noticed the sign that afternoon, Mary read it aloud in her careful, proud voice, sounding out each letter. Samuel asked if he could carve his own name someday. Sarah wanted to know if goats got signs too. The baby clapped fat hands from Eliza's hip, oblivious but content. Laughter moved through the yard like wind through grass, easy and unforced. Winter followed close behind autumn snow, falling soft at first, then heavy enough to bury the path to the barn. Caleb taught the older children to use snowshoes he wove from willow and rawhide. They trudged out each morning to feed the stock cheeks, red eyes bright. Eliza kept the fire high-baked flatbread on hot stones, mended clothes by lamplight until her fingers cramped. Nights grew long, but never lonely. Caleb would sit with her after the children slept, sometimes carving, sometimes simply holding her hand while the wind moaned under the eaves. One blizzard night, when the storm rattled the shutters like fists, the baby woke feverish. Eliza rocked him for hours, pressing cool cloths to his forehead, fear rising sharp in her throat. Caleb built the fire, boiled willow bark tea the way his mother had taught him, spooned it drop by drop into the small mouth. By dawn, the fever broke. The baby slept cool and quiet in her arms. Caleb sat beside them on the cot, head bowed, hands clasped between his knees. "I was afraid," he said, voice rough. "Thought I'd... what a one." She reached for his hand. "You didn't. We didn't." He looked at her, then eyes wet in the firelight. "I want more than this cabin someday. A school for the young ones close enough they don't have to board in town. A proper barn. Land for them when they're grown. But mostly, I want years. Enough years we forget what it felt like to be alone." She leaned into him, the baby between them, breathing slow and even. "We'll have them." Spring came again, mud and green, and the smell of thawing earth. Eliza found she was carrying another child, early yet, but certain. She told Caleb one evening while they watched the sunset from the porch, his arm around her shoulders, the children chasing fireflies in the yard below. He went still, then pulled her closer. "Boy or girl," he said, "they'll have your eyes. And maybe my stubborn streak." She laughed softly. "God help us all." He slipped the ring he had given her from her finger, then slid it back on again, slower this time, as though renewing a vow only they could hear. "I choose this," he said. "Every day. You. Them. This place. All of it." She turned in his arms, kissed him under the wide sky that had once seemed so indifferent. Now it felt like a witness, quiet and approving. The children ran up the hill, breathless, and glowing fireflies caught in their palms like small lanterns. Mary opened her hands and let them go. Lights drifted upward, joining the first stars. Samuel and Sarah clapped delighted. The baby cooed from the cradle just inside the open door. Caleb and Eliza watched it, all the lights rising, the children laughing, the land stretching out around them, scarred and beautiful, and theirs. The future lay ahead, uncharted but no longer frightening. They would walk it together, step by steady step roots, deep in soil they had both bled to claim. The night settled soft around the cabin, warm lamplight spilling from the windows, smoke curling from the chimney into the clear dark. Somewhere a coyote sang lonely but not alone. The campfire still burns low and steady. Subscribe and don't leave it unattended yet.